You stand on the precipice of understanding, gazing back into an epoch consumed by the smoke of superstition and the flickering flame of faith, a time when knowledge was not merely power, but often a perilous burden. You imagine the chill of damp stone in monastic scriptoriums, the rustle of vellum, the whispered prayers, and the ever-present shadow of the Holy Inquisition, always listening, always watching. This was an age of paradox, where the light of God was meant to illuminate all, yet the light of human inquiry was frequently deemed a dangerous heresy. You are taught of a medieval world defined by its grand cathedrals, its valiant knights, and its rigid social order, a tapestry woven with threads of devotion and defiance. But what if, within this familiar landscape, there existed a secret, a sanctuary so audacious in its conception, so impossible in its execution, that it defied every notion you hold about the limitations of the medieval mind? A place born of desperation, fueled by intellect, and protected by an ingenuity that could only be described as miraculous. Think of the burning libraries of antiquity, the scrolls consumed by fire, the knowledge of empires turned to ash. You feel the sting of that loss, the irreplaceable wisdom obliterated, plunging humanity into what history often labels the Dark Ages. But imagine for a moment that within this perceived darkness, a flicker of defiance sparked, a refusal to let the accumulated wisdom of ages, the daring philosophies, the scientific observations that dared to question dogma, simply vanish. For centuries, scholars and sages, philosophers and naturalists amassed knowledge, from the towering libraries of Alexandria and Baghdad to the quiet cloisters of Irish monks. Truth was sought, recorded, and debated. You hear the whispers of these texts echoing through time, treatises on astronomy that charted distant stars with unnerving accuracy, medical tomes that described anatomy far beyond what was commonly accepted, philosophical works that questioned the very nature of God and man, and even texts on engineering that spoke of mechanisms far too complex for the simple tools of the day. But as the power of the Church consolidated its grip across medieval Europe, a shadow fell over this burgeoning intellectual curiosity. You see the bonfires flickering in town squares, not merely burning heretics, but also the books that fed their minds. The word forbidden became a brand, scorching not just pages, but souls. Knowledge, once revered, was now a weapon, and its possession, a capital offense. The Codex Hereticus became the most dangerous of all scrolls. You feel the growing fear among those who valued truth above all else. What was to be done? How could the fragile flames of learning be protected from the gale-force winds of religious orthodoxy and political suppression? To hide books in a monastery was to risk their confiscation. To bury them in the earth was to invite rot and ruin. A sanctuary was needed, not just hidden, but untraceable, not just protected, but impervious. And so the seed of an extraordinary idea was planted, an idea so audacious, so contrary to the very notion of medieval engineering, that you might dismiss it as a mere fantasy. But as you will soon discover on Medieval Times Uncharted, reality often wears the mask of the impossible, especially when the stakes are nothing less than the accumulated wisdom of humankind. What if, instead of building a fortress on land, it was built upon the water? You sense the immediate skepticism. A floating fortress in the Middle Ages? A time of wooden ships battling stormy seas? How could such a marvel of engineering, a veritable island of knowledge, exist without being swept away by currents, battered by tempests, or simply discovered by the prying eyes of those who sought to extinguish its light? This is precisely where the genius of its creators, a clandestine order known only as the Custodians Veritatis, the guardians of truth, truly shone. Their journey began not with blueprints, but with ancient texts. You envision parchment scrolls unfurling in flickering candlelight, revealing forgotten Roman principles of buoyancy, lost Alexandrian studies of fluid dynamics, and even subtle hints from Eastern philosophies on balanced construction. These weren't mere engineers, they were scholar engineers, their minds spanning the breadth of human knowledge, each piece a vital puzzle part in the grand design. You witness the laborious secret collection of the forbidden texts themselves. Imagine cloaked figures moving through moonlit alleys, precious scrolls tucked beneath robes, whispering coded passages, risking everything. From the dusty shelves of crumbling Roman villas to the hidden chambers of persecuted Jewish scholars, from the obscure translations of Arabic science to the subversive philosophy of early pagan resurgence, every illicit page was a beacon, guiding the custodians to their sacred purpose. Each retrieved manuscript, wrapped in linen and sealed with wax, represented a triumph against oblivion, a defiant whisper against the roar of burning pyres. You can almost feel the weight of these books in your hands, not just parchment and ink, but centuries of human thought, debate, and discovery. These were the works that explored the heliocentric universe long before Copernicus dared to publish the medical treatises that spoke of germs and antiseptics, centuries before Pasteur the philosophical critiques that questioned monarchy and divine right, when such thoughts meant certain death. These were the keys to unlocking a future that the medieval world seemed determined to keep locked away. The chosen location for their daring construction project was, fittingly, as hidden as the knowledge itself. You envision a vast, secluded freshwater lake, nestled deep within an impenetrable mountain range, perhaps in the uncharted wilds of the Balkan Peninsula, or the vast, forgotten corners of the Germanic forests. This lake, often shrouded in a perpetual mist, was rumored by local peasants to be home to ancient spirits or monstrous beasts, effectively deterring all but the most desperate or foolhardy from venturing too close. You feel the isolation, the sheer monumental effort required to transport not only the materials, but also the skilled laborers, shipwrights, carpenters, metallurgists, and architects, who would eventually become the first inhabitants and protectors of this floating marvel. Each step of the journey was a tightrope walk between discovery and oblivion. Every felled tree, every hewn stone, every forged iron plate had to be moved under the cloak of night, along paths deliberately obfuscated or even rerouted to avoid detection. The initial construction began beneath the lake's surface, a foundation of massive, hollowed-out tree trunks, sealed with pitch and tar, acting as giant pontoons. You can almost hear the rhythmic thud of mallets, the creak of rope and pulley, all muffled by the dense forest and the ever-present mists. Slowly, meticulously, a hidden behemoth began to take shape, unseen by the world above. This was no ordinary vessel. You realize this was not a ship designed for speed or battle, but for stability, endurance, and above all, secrecy. Its sheer size alone would have been an unprecedented feat of engineering for the era. Imagine interlocking segments, each meticulously crafted to float independently, yet connect seamlessly, forming a cohesive artificial island that could withstand the harshest of nature's furies. The engineering was a testament to lost knowledge rediscovered. You see the influence of Roman concrete, used not in its traditional form, but in a modified watertight cement that bonded the massive wooden structures. You identify elements of Chinese shipbuilding techniques, brought west along ancient trade routes, allowing for compartmentalized hulls that minimized the risk of catastrophic sinking. This was a fusion of global intellect, all converging in this one clandestine project. You gaze upon the network of sympathizers, you learn, was just as fascinating as the fortress itself. You picture a clandestine web woven across Europe. Merchants, minor nobles, scholars in various universities, even some disillusioned clergy. These individuals, known as the keepers of the path, risked their lives to funnel new texts to the custodians, to provide supplies, and to report on political and religious movements that might threaten the fortress. You imagine the coded messages, the The secret drops, the elaborate ruses employed to protect this lifeline. A simple bag of grain might contain a precious new manuscript. A seemingly innocent peddler could be carrying vital intelligence. Each interaction was fraught with peril, a silent dance between preservation and exposure. You realize the incredible foresight of these keepers. They weren't just saving books, they were safeguarding the very capacity for independent thought, ensuring that alternative perspectives, scientific advancements, and philosophical debates would not be entirely extinguished, even if they had to be hidden from the mainstream. They were sowing seeds for a future intellectual awakening. The stories told by the custodians, passed down through generations within the fortress, describe moments of near discovery. You hear of inquisitorial ships patrolling the lake, their priests scanning the mists for any unnatural sign. You imagine the fortress going completely silent, its internal lights extinguished, its inhabitants holding their breath, relying on their camouflage, and the lake's natural fog to remain unseen, a massive, silent shadow amidst the real shadows. You feel the tension of those moments, the very air thick with the threat of discovery. One wrong sound, one glint of light, one shift in the wind could betray centuries of work and generations of sacrifice. The custodians understood that their greatest weapon was their anonymity, their ability to be present yet invisible, to exist where nothing was supposed to exist. And so, for centuries, the floating fortress remained. A phantom library, a movable monastery, sailing the currents of time and water, preserving the intellectual heritage that Europe, in its darkest hours, sought to destroy. It became a living legend among its dedicated few, a whispered hope for those who still clung to the belief in the power of knowledge. You wonder about the impact of this hidden sanctuary. How many ideas, how many theories, how many vital pieces of human understanding survived the medieval crucible because of this impossible fortress? And what did its existence mean for the eventual Renaissance, the Age of Enlightenment, the very intellectual bedrock of your modern world? The implications are staggering, almost too vast to comprehend. You ponder the profound question: what was the true purpose of hoarding this vast, forbidden library? Was it merely to save books from burning? To act as a medieval intellectual ark? Or was there a grander, more audacious plan? The custodians were not just librarians. They were also scholars, actively studying, debating, and synthesizing the diverse knowledge they preserved. You realize this was a forge of thought, not just a vault. Imagine the breakthroughs achieved within those hidden walls. You envision a scholar comparing an ancient Greek text on mechanics with a contemporary Arabic treatise on hydraulics, cross-referencing them with empirical observations from the fortress's own sophisticated engineering. Imagine a polymath priest, free from the constraints of dogma, daring to combine the heliocentric models of ancient astronomers with the meticulous star charts he could now access, charting a universe vastly different from the one preached from pulpits. You understand that this wasn't just about preserving information. It was about nurturing the next generation of independent thinkers. Young recruits, carefully vetted and secretly brought to the fortress, were educated in a curriculum that spanned disciplines from medicine to philosophy, from astronomy to engineering, all without the filter of church doctrine. You see them poring over texts, discussing radical ideas, their minds igniting with curiosity. These students, upon completing their training, weren't necessarily meant to stay. Some, now armed with a breadth of knowledge far exceeding that of their peers, would be quietly reintroduced into the outside world. You see them, disguised as merchants, clerks, or even minor clergy, subtly influencing the currents of thought, introducing innovative ideas, or challenging existing paradigms in ways that seem to originate from their own genius, not from a forbidden source. You trace the invisible threads of their influence. A new architectural technique suddenly appears in a distant cathedral, bearing striking similarities to designs found in the fortress's forbidden scrolls. An unexplainable surge in agricultural efficiency in a remote province mirrors experimental farming methods detailed in a preserved Roman agricultural text. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift in philosophical debate, pushing towards a more humanist perspective, takes root in a major university. You begin to question everything you thought you knew about the progress of the Middle Ages. Was the slow crawl out of the so-called Dark Ages truly organic, or was it subtly orchestrated, guided by these hidden hands, these graduates of the floating fortress, carefully disseminating sparks of knowledge designed to ignite larger fires? The most profound impact, however, lay in its role as a failsafe. You realize that without this concentrated repository of diverse knowledge, the Renaissance itself might have taken a vastly different, perhaps even more prolonged path. The rediscovery of classical texts, the explosion of scientific inquiry, the challenging of papal authority, all these pivotal moments relied on a foundational body of knowledge that the outside world had, at various points, either lost or suppressed. What if, for instance, a crucial astronomical observation, a foundational mathematical principle, or a revolutionary philosophical argument had been entirely erased by war or zealotry? You feel the chill of a world permanently deprived of that vital piece of human insight. The floating fortress stood as a bulwark against such intellectual oblivion, ensuring that the seeds of future revolutions were kept safe, ready to be replanted when the intellectual climate outside became more hospitable. Yet, even the most ingenious secrets cannot last forever. You sense the gradual shift, the slow turning of the tides that would eventually render the fortress's primary mission obsolete, or at least change its nature. As the medieval era waned, and the early whispers of the Renaissance began to grow into a chorus, the need for such extreme secrecy began to diminish. The invention of the printing press in the 15th century, for example, was a game-changer. You imagine the custodians observing this technological marvel from afar, recognizing its revolutionary potential. What once required years of meticulous hand-copying to duplicate a single text could now be achieved in days. The very nature of knowledge dissemination was fundamentally altered, making it increasingly difficult, if not impossible, to control or suppress information on a large scale. As more universities embraced new ideas, as explorers brought back accounts of new lands and new ways of thinking, and as the power of the Church began to fracture with the Reformation, the external world slowly but surely caught up to and in some areas surpassed the protected knowledge within the fortress. The intellectual climate outside began to warm. You consider the difficult choices the custodians must have faced. To remain hidden indefinitely, risking irrelevance in a rapidly changing world, or to emerge and risk exposure and potential destruction at a time when their methods were no longer as necessary, but their existence might still provoke powerful enemies. The transition was gradual, shrouded in the same secrecy that birthed the fortress. Some theories suggest a slow, deliberate integration. You imagine select texts carefully chosen for their potential to spark further inquiry, being discovered in long-forgotten monastery archives or acquired by wealthy patrons from obscure collections. Each a deliberate leak, a carefully placed clue designed to accelerate the intellectual awakening of Europe. Other theories speak of a final, magnificent act of revelation. You picture a specific moment in history, perhaps the early years of the Age of Exploration, or the height of the Renaissance, when the custodians, sensing their time had come, simply opened their metaphorical doors. They would have then systematically, yet subtly, introduced their vast repository of knowledge into the burgeoning intellectual centers of the world. The most intriguing, and perhaps most plausible theory, suggests that the floating fortress simply disappeared. Not in a spectacular, destructive way, but quietly, fading from memory like a dream upon waking. Its mission completed, its legacy secured, the custodians might have dismantled it piece by piece, returning its components to nature, leaving behind no trace but the lasting impact of its intellectual payload. You search for archaeological evidence, for a sunken hull, a hidden structure beneath the lake. But the very design of the fortress, its mimicry of nature, its ability to move and blend, would make such a search almost impossible. It was built to be invisible, and its end was likely just as elusive, maintaining its mystique even in its absence. The tale of the floating fortress leaves you with a lingering sense of awe and a profound challenge to your understanding of history. You are forced to re-evaluate the Dark Ages, to see them not as a period of unmitigated intellectual stagnation, but as a complex interplay of suppression and fierce, defiant preservation. The custodians didn't just save books, they saved ideas. They ensured that the flame of human inquiry, though dimmed, never truly died. And what became of the custodians themselves? Did they simply dissolve into the growing intellectual community of the Renaissance, their mission accomplished? Or do their descendants, perhaps, still exist, quietly watching, guarding new forms of forbidden knowledge, ready to build a new sanctuary should humanity once again turn against its own pursuit of truth? You are left to wonder if the fight for knowledge ever truly ends. This story, passed down through whispers and tantalizing fragments, serves as a powerful reminder. You understand now that history is rarely as simple as textbooks suggest. There are layers upon layers of hidden narratives, of unsung heroes and secret societies, of impossible feats performed in the name of a greater good. The medieval world, far from being monochromatic, was a canvas painted with the deepest shades of intrigue and the brightest sparks of human ingenuity. So, as you look upon the pages of history, remember the tale of the floating fortress. Remember the custodians who dared to defy the powerful, not with swords, but with scrolls. Remember the untold impact of their audacious gamble, a testament to the enduring power of knowledge, silently shaping the world from the most improbable of sanctuaries. Now you might be asking yourself, if such a monumental undertaking, a floating library of forbidden knowledge, truly existed, why is there no definitive proof? No crumbling ruins, no eyewitness accounts that survived the ages, no mention in any historical record? This is precisely where the genius of the custodians and the enduring allure of uncharted history truly comes into play. You realize the ultimate triumph of the floating fortress wasn't just its construction, nor its preservation of knowledge. It was its disappearance, its ability to vanish, leaving behind only echoes, whispers, and the subtle yet undeniable imprints on the tapestry of history. This wasn't accidental. It was the final, meticulously planned act of its custodians. Consider the custodians' profound understanding of their world. They knew that overt revelation would invite destruction. They knew that their most valuable legacy would be not a physical monument, but the ideas they preserved, woven into the fabric of evolving human thought. Their aim was not glory, but impact, not recognition, but transmission. One compelling theory suggests that as the printing press democratized knowledge and the Renaissance began to flourish, the custodians initiated a deliberate and slow decommissioning. You envision a process spanning decades, perhaps even centuries. Carefully selected texts, those deemed safe for the evolving intellectual climate, would have been slowly introduced into mainstream circulation through their network of keepers of the path. Imagine an anonymous donation of ancient manuscripts to a newly established university library, or a seemingly accidental discovery in a long-forgotten crypt. Each such event could have been a strategic release from the floating fortress, timed to maximize impact and minimize suspicion. They were not merely releasing books, they were guiding the flow of intellectual current. What about the fortress itself? Its very construction lent itself to a graceful, unrecorded dissolution. You recall its foundational pontoons of hollowed-out timber, sealed with pitch. Over time, these could have been individually unsealed, allowing water to flood in, causing sections to gently sink to the lakebed. The carefully integrated natural camouflage would have then become its ultimate shroud, making its submerged remnants almost indistinguishable from the natural contours of the lake. You contemplate the fate of the remaining texts, the truly dangerous, the still forbidden ones. Were they destroyed, deemed too potent even for a changing world? Or were they sealed within those sinking sections, becoming time capsules awaiting a future, even more distant, age of discovery? You feel a shiver of anticipation at the thought of a future archaeological dive, revealing a preserved library beneath the tranquil waters of a forgotten lake. The custodians themselves, their mission fulfilled, would have melted back into society. You see them becoming the anonymous scholars, the innovative artisans, the quiet philosophers who subtly nudge their world towards enlightenment. Their names may be lost to history, but their legacy, the very intellectual landscape you inhabit, stands as their monument. They were the silent architects of the modern mind. Perhaps the greatest proof of their existence isn't a physical artifact, but the sudden, almost inexplicable leaps in European thought that occurred after the medieval period. You see the Renaissance blossoming with an abundance of rediscovered knowledge that, for many historians, seems to appear almost ex nihilo. What if much of it was not simply rediscovered, but carefully, intelligently reintroduced? Consider the advancements in cartography, astronomy, and navigation that fueled the age of exploration. You realize that many of the new theories and instruments could have been refined and preserved within the floating fortress, providing a critical head start that propelled European expansion and scientific discovery. They didn't just save knowledge, they accelerated progress. So when you look at the breathtaking art of Leonardo da Vinci, or read the revolutionary ideas of Galileo Galilei, or marvel at the architectural wonders of the Renaissance, you are invited to see not just the genius of those individuals, but the subtle hand of the custodians. They were the anonymous facilitators, the unseen librarians, who ensured that the sparks of genius had enough fuel to ignite the future. The story of the floating fortress is more than a historical curiosity. It is a powerful metaphor. You understand that the fight for knowledge, for truth, against the forces of suppression and ignorance, is an eternal one. It reminds you that what is deemed forbidden today might hold the keys to tomorrow's understanding. It challenges you to look beyond the official narratives, to question what you think you know, and to seek out the hidden currents that truly shaped your world. The medieval period, often dismissed as a barren intellectual landscape, now reveals itself as a battleground of ideas, a crucible where the very future of human thought was forged. And at its heart, a secret sanctuary, a floating island of defiance, silently navigated the turbulent waters of history, carrying the torch of knowledge through the darkest of times. You may never see a physical remnant of the floating fortress. Its success lay in its perfect camouflage, its seamless integration into the myths and mists of an age. But its legacy, its intellectual payload, is all around you. It resides in every book you read, every scientific discovery you cherish, every freedom of thought you exercise. It is the silent, profound whisper of a history that dared to float above the ordinary. So the next time you gaze upon a placid lake or lose yourself in the pages of a profound book, remember the possibility. Remember the custodians. Remember the floating fortress. Because some of the greatest secrets aren't etched in stone or buried in tombs. They are carried on the waters of time, waiting for you to discover them. If this deep dive into the hidden currents of medieval history has sparked your curiosity and made you question what you thought you knew, then smash that like button. If you crave more stories of uncharted history of the secret forces and impossible feats that shaped our world, then subscribe to Medieval Times Uncharted and hit the notification bell so you do not miss our next journey into the unknown. Tell us in the comments below, what other forgotten knowledge do you think the medieval world might have secretly guarded? And what untold story of defiance against ignorance most captivates your imagination? Join the discussion, for in the sharing of ideas, the legacy of the custodians truly lives on. Thank you for joining us on this incredible voyage. Until next time, keep seeking the truth, no matter how deeply it's hidden.